And welcome back to ConTinual. And today we have a special guest with us, or actually a couple of special guests with us, where we're going to have a good chat with the one and only Ann Bishop, talk a bit about a number of series, her very long and storied career. And we're also joined today by Dixon as well. So Deb, do you want to give a quick intro and then we will go to the star of the hour?
Sure. I've been in publishing since dirt was invented, I think. So, and I've been on just about every side you can be on. I was published with major publishers. I've done a book or two with a smaller publisher, and 20 some odd years ago, I was part of a group that began the publishing company Bell Books, and we're still there kicking and doing our thing. But along the way, the only fan letter I've ever written in my entire life has been to this writer named Ann Bishop. I had found her first of the Black Jewels series, Daughter of the Blood, and I just absolutely fell in love with the series. And at that time, I was vice president of Romance Writers of America. And it's the only time I ever used my powers for evil. I wrote Ann a fan letter and asked who her publisher and editor were, not publisher, but editor was, because I really thought that the folks at the RWA conference that was coming up should really know about her books. But what I wanted was her editor's name so I could write the editor and see if I could get an advance reading copy of the next book in the series. So this is my advanced reading copy that I got many years ago, the uncorrected page proof. So that's how I came to know Ann. And she's just such a fascinating writer. I'm just delighted that we're gonna get to hear from her today about all kinds of good stuff.
So Ann, I wanna thank you for coming to hang out with us here, but why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself for the 2 or 3 people that might not know who you are?
Well, to kind of jump back from where Deb was, because as she wrote to my editor and got an advance copy of The Invisible Ring, then we started communicating, and then she said, "We've got this collective novels called Mossy Creek."
Oh, I forgot. Yes.
Would you like to write a story? And I said, but you know, I've read the first 2 books and I loved Mossy Creek. And I said, I don't know what to write about it. But then an idea came and I wrote the story.
Yep.
About a Yankee and her parakeet who come down to live in Mossy Creek. And there were bad words in the email, which made us cry. We're buying it.
Listen, people were in tears. I was in tears reading it. And she left, this was a continuing series, and she left my character in that series with a parakeet. So I then had to incorporate parakeet care into the life of this police chief who happened to be my character. So I thought that was a real dirty trick to play, just to you know, on her dear friend, she would do that to me. But anyway, yeah, so that was part of our story together. But Jules wasn't your first series, was it, Ann?
Yes.
Was that your first New York Times series?
The Black Jewels trilogy was my first novel.
You know, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, I wrote short stories for a number of years and got some of them published in semi-professional magazines, and then kind of kept going up the ladder in terms of from the Xerox copies where you got your payment was 1 copy of what was published to actually the glossier kinds of magazines that you got a quarter cent a word kind of and a copy. And at that point I was, I'd been serious about writing, but I was ready to kind of go into bigger stories. And at that time, I had an opportunity to go to a workshop with Ellen Datlow and Nancy Kress. And it was a week-long workshop. And right before that, in the letters to the editor of this magazine called 2 AM, which had published a story of mine, there was this very nice letter by this guy named Charles Flint who praised my story. And in this workshop, we got like a 10-minute one-on-one with each of Ellen and Nancy. And I was telling them about the story, and I said, you know, and it has, and the guy who wrote this really nice comment has the same name as the writer. And they said, and that is the writer. And I said, oh, do you think it would be okay if I sent him a thank you letter? And they said, sure. And they gave me his address, and I wrote to him. And I corresponded with Charles for a number of years. And at that point, then I took a deep breath and I said, and I had this story that had been building for a few years. It took a while to build the Black Jewels world and those characters. And I took the leap and I said, it's one story in 3 parts. One story in 3 parts. It was going to be a novel. And the friend who has been my first reader forever said, no. By the time I got through the first 100 pages and he'd read that, and he said, no, it's not a novel, it's a trilogy. And I said, no, it's one story in 3 parts, because a trilogy would be too scary.
Yeah.
And about 200, 300 pages into the first novel, I said, you know, it might be 3 books. And he said, but he has
maybe
ever at a signing ever said, I told you so. He is, you know, he has never said that.
And rightly so.
But I wrote Daughter, and it sent it out a number of times, and it came winging back, and then finally got an agent who said, we really like this, but we think it needs some work here, here, and here. And I did the work and sent it back, and I sent it out. And we got several editors who said, I really like this, but I don't know how to publish it. I don't know what it is. It's not this and it's not that. It's
what year was that, Anne? Was that?
Well, Rock finally bought it. Penguin finally bought it in 1997.
Okay.
So, that was one of the things that I discovered, that I'm considered a pioneer of the romantic dark fantasy genre. Because until Daughter kind of broke, nobody really had seen that combination of magic and sex and sexuality and
dark
world,
and
dark characters. So it was that whole thing together, and it went out to a number of places where editors really liked it. They just didn't know what to do with it. And finally it went to Penguin, and they said, yeah, we kind of know what to do with this. And so they bought the trilogy, and I wrote Daughter. I wrote Heir. I had lost my job at that time. The company had downsized, so I had this year to kind of live off my retirement fund, which was this minuscule little thing at the time. And that's what I said I was going to do. I was going to take the leap and write. And I wrote Heir, and then went back and did freelance work and part-time work and stuff, because I had to pay the bills, and was also writing Queen. And at the time, no, I wrote Daughter, I wrote Heir. And then my agent said, well, maybe try a single title in that world. So I wrote The Invisible Ring, because I had that idea at the same time. And then I was almost finished with the first draft of Ring when Penguin bought the trilogy. And so then I had to write Queen. But that's why if you look at the trilogy and Ring, in Ring, there's a solution for a problem that they have.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that the characters in Queen of the Darkness needed the same solution or the same kind of solution. So because I was almost incorporating all 4 of those books together, I had, and one was in the past, I had them reading the diary, the journey of Jerry as the solution for what Janelle needed to do.
Okay. I never caught that. Now, and did Daughter of the Blood, the first in the Black Jewels trilogy, did that hit the New York Times list right out of the gate, or was it a later book that hit?
I think Tangled Webs was my first New York Times.
Okay.
So that would have been a few books. It was getting close, but I think Tangled Webs was the first one that actually made the New York Times, and then there have been others, because it's like once you get that many readers excited about a series, then they keep going. So.
And of course, you're the exception that proves the rule, right? Because we tell everyone, don't expect to sell your first novel. Don't expect to sell a series that's not completely finished. And here you toddle out and write your first novel and sell a series and get a good agent, and sell a series. So thank you so much for screwing up the heads of, or actually providing inspiration to writers, I guess. What do you think, Jim? That's inspirational, or do you want to kill it? Which is it?
Plus doing it with one of those things where nobody knows what else to do with it. But hey, we're going to give it a try.
Oh, I forgot that part. Yes. And publishing a book that doesn't have a clear-cut genre and market spot. Thank you so much. So, but it's a great book. So that's what happens. Write a good book. That's the most important thing any writer can do. What is the most first, I'm going to shut up for a minute. Tell us how many books you've written, Anne, and because I know most people are going to know who you are, but I think it would help people to understand how much you've got behind you and experience of getting these great books out there. Do you know?
Okay. Daughter of the Blood came out in 1998, and that was my first book. I turned in novel 26 a couple of months ago. So I've written 26 novels in different worlds.
Published novels.
Published novels. Yeah.
How many aren't published? How many are sitting in the shoebox underneath the bed?
None. I wrote a couple of novellas that said, no, these should not see the light of day, and I actually shredded them. I let them go. But Daughter was my first novel. So the trilogy was my first novel. It's like, don't do this.
How hard is it to let go of something that you've written? I think many writers struggle with, I've got this material written. It's sacred. I can't let go of it. I have to keep beating the dead horse. How do you manage that yourself? How do you sit down and have a talk with yourself about, I can't go to the left, I really need to go to the right? How do you manage your rational, objective opinions of your work?
Well, it's like any part of writing. You have to practice. The first times that an editor will tell you, this should be, we don't need this. This is too much baggage in a big novel already. It's okay to whimper a lot while you hit the delete button. That's what you learn. It's okay to whimper along. I did tangents in the first couple of books that just went nowhere, but they were about side characters, like fourth level characters. And it's hard to let go when you've spent a couple of days writing something, but you learn. And after a while, you learn that you can just sit for 20 minutes and visualize that scene very clearly and tell the muse, we're done with that. We wrote it in our head, we're done with that. And not have to spend the time actually writing it.
Mhm.
I've gotten pretty good doing that.
Mhm.
But at first, it's brutal to let go.
Mhm.
It's okay to whimper. I whimpered a lot.
What's the one thing you let go during those days that you still regret?
There really isn't. There are stories that were published very early in my career that will not, I would not go and have reprinted. They're past what they are. On the other hand, there are some that I like a lot, and we're seeing if there's an interest in doing a story collection, and some of those are my very earliest pieces, the ones that I really like, but they're raw. And having read them, because I was trying to save them by gathering them in a format that the newer computers will read before they are so far and so old that nothing can read.
Not compatible. Oh my gosh.
And some of them I actually had to type back in because I sent them out and got them published when I was still using an electric typewriter. So
oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
My first actual published piece, which was a poem, was from 1987. And my earliest stories are from 88, 89, 90, 91. So these are kind of what I think of as the young stories, the stories that taught me how to write. And I see some of the things that are still in my writing, but I also see that these are the raw beginnings of someone who wants to write. And hopefully they will get back out in the world, because it would be nice. I get letters from people who say, I really want to write, and I have trouble finishing stories because I look at your stuff and mine just isn't good enough. And I think, well, 30 years ago, mine weren't good enough either. So these are the young stories. These are the beginning stories. And hopefully it would be saying, take a look. This is, apples to apples, rather than 30 years and thousands of pages of writing.
Well, I think it would be fascinating to see the DNA that's there, in those early works. So I'm hoping, I'm looking forward to a collection of your writings. I mean, I would love to. Well, I'll get to read them anyway. You'll let me see them regardless. Because anytime she's thinking about writing something, I'll go, but I'm going to get to see that, right? She's the only time that I've used, my powers for evil. And I'm fortunate enough that I am able to read a lot of Anne's stuff early. And one of the things that I've noticed, Anne, and maybe if you can talk a bit about that, even though you don't know every little detail. You're not a writer who has this 75-page outline of everything that's going to happen in the book, but your writer brain, your process and how you work through it, and you have an idea where you're going, and you know what an Anne Bishop story and what it isn't. Can you talk a little bit about the process of how you come to an idea and then how you commit to that idea? Because you listen to the muse a lot and you feed the muse a lot. And I think some people might need to understand how to do that as well, or that it's important. So,
well, I'm an organic writer. I'm not seat of the pants, and I'm not an outliner. I think a lot about the story and the people and the world. And there are scenes that are in my mind that I think of as touchstones along the way. So you start the journey and you know that you're aiming for this thing to happen, and you're aiming for this thing to happen. And most of the time they will, not necessarily the way I envisioned them originally, but I am kind of hitting those little stones in the pond to get across to the other side. Right now, I'm developing places that are new to me. For the first time in about a dozen years, I'm actually exploring something that I haven't written in at all. And I'm thinking about it in terms of little pieces of ideas, just images or sounds or thoughts or names, and they're all on these soap bubbles. So it's like I'm surrounded all of these little bubbles with one little shining thing that belongs to it. And as I keep thinking about it and thinking about who these people are, where they want to be, and what kind of magic, because I love fantasy and I love the supernatural, and that's the playground I want to be in. But it's almost like those soap bubbles will touch, and these two little ideas will merge, and you get these little merges, and things get bigger, and all of a sudden you go, oh, that's the place. Well, that's cool. But it's a patience game. You start out with anything. You read everything, and it could be a phrase in a book. It could be a phrase in fiction, nonfiction. It could be the refrain of a song. It could be a picture in a magazine. And all of those things will sit there, and they will lie fallow until there's a spark that will make them come together with other thoughts and ideas. An example, in Heroic Hearts, the anthology that just came out in May, I wrote a story called The Dark Ship. I had an image, a picture of I think it was a pirate ship, but it was this ship with tattered sails. So it looked like a ghost ship. It looked like something haunted. And it was on a sea, and you had a full moon, and as the moon hit the water, it was shaped like a skull instead. And that image, I probably had that image for like 20 years. Didn't know what to do with it, but I kept remembering it because it fascinated me. And then a couple years ago, a friend and we went to see the tall ships that had sailed into the Buffalo Harbor. And we went to see the tall ships. And that was fascinating too, because you get to stand on these sailing ships that cross the ocean, that do their things, and get the feel of it. And we went out and did a little sailboat ride. And there was also, they were talking about the dangers of sea lampreys in the Great Lakes. And they had a big aquarium of sea lampreys. And if you've never seen a sea lamprey, you should look one up. They are scarier than, because they're this long tube of a critter with this mouth that is full of teeth. It's just and a raspy tongue. So they latch onto fish and then they just bore into the fish. And the fish tend to die, which is why sea lampreys are not very good. And I stared at one because one of them was just pressed up against the glass so you could see its little mouth, and said, oh, ideas. And that's where, and so it began to click, this dark ship in the other's world. We have this critter that is scary and is going to be one of the elders, and pirates, and a question of risk, because it was about being a hero when things are not going to make it easy to be a hero. And I ended up writing this story about Corvo and debt and the dark ship and all of these things that happened. But it was one image that held for 20 years, and then a series of images and experiences that all came together in a world that I was thinking about and had been writing in, and it's set in a different place. So it was the challenge of going to the Mediterranean Sea, and deciding who's where and who lives and where debt lives, and then building. So it's always this process of building and being patient, because in another example, I carried around the first line of a story for like 10 years before I knew what the story was. And the line was, they called her the voice because she had none.
I know that story. Yes.
Yeah. So you just keep gathering information and gathering the things that are of interest to you, because not everything is going to be of interest. So, and we can't all write all themes because we're not built that way. One of the best things I ever read in, I think it was Writer's Digest, probably many years ago, was that this person said, not all stories are meant for you. Learn to recognize the stories you are meant to write and write them. And I accept the fact that I write dark. It would probably be a lot easier on me if I could write light and fluffy, but I don't. I write dark with some grace notes of light and fluffy.
True.
And because that's what I do. Those are the stories that call to me. Those are the stories that want what I bring to them, in order for them to be heard. So
yeah. One of the things that in the stuff of yours that I've read, when I look at the magic systems, because that's one of those things that I always love to study, is how do you build magical systems? How do you build the rules? How do you build the culture and the society? Because whenever you introduce this, you're creating a lot of ways that will create a society that has to structure around the idea of, well, magic is real. Who knows what, who doesn't? But you've built a lot of structure around, not only is there magic, but how much strength does someone have? The jewels, all the rest of this that builds and layers onto each other. So what does it take to go through and build such an elaborate system? I mean, especially when you started with it's going to be one book. It's going to be three. It's going to be an entire universe. That's one of those things that over time, all of a sudden, you've got to discover. How do you play within your own rules after you're in 20 books in?
Well, you're committed to playing by your own rules, which sometimes is not easy, but it started with some simple ideas in playing with the magic that their magic in the Black Jewels world, their magical system is based on the power in jewels, which indicates their power, their social status, and their caste. And it's like you always, that trio of different kinds of power is always working within that society. And some things, you don't mess with people who wear dark jewels, no matter, they can be the blacksmith or they can be the baker, but if they are the highest ranking jewel in your village, you don't mess with them because they're going to smash you. They're obliged to smash you to make sure that everybody plays by the rules and that the people who are the weakest are protected. And that's why they have a strong code of honor. They have a strong sense of protocol, which are their basic rules of their culture and their society. That these certain, they even have phrases that they use to guarantee, if you say this, what anyone who is stronger is going to respect that request for them to back off unless you're doing something wrong. But the stronger do not take advantage of the weaker. That's part of that world. I played a lot with swapping which gender was bound by social mores, sexual mores, double standards. And I was playing against a lot of the things that I had read historically that were happening in our world. But it wasn't fun to try to write a story where the women were still oppressed. It was more saying, if a man is faced with this and you have this society, how does he respond if he's also like the alpha romantic males in the romances? So you have these alpha males and you have this turning around of gender rules and this collision of and a sense of honor. And all of those things were things that I felt sure of before I started actually writing the story, because then I knew these are the rules that should work in that society. And then the question in Daughter of Blood was, what happens if that goes wrong? Because it's based on trust. And so much of their society is based on trust that everyone will abide by the laws that they have set up. And when they don't, it just, we watched the destruction of one of their worlds because of the corruption. So I started there, and as I keep going with the Sa Diablo family, it's more become a family saga with all of these other issues and challenges around them. But you have this strong family, which I love the characters in that family.
Would you say that one of the themes in your work is community responsibility to the whole and protecting the weak? Because I'm sitting here trying to think if you have a theme within your world, a core belief that kind of comes through in your novels. And I think one of them might be that the community is supposed to protect the weak, that the community is supposed to act individually and collectively for the benefit of all. Do you agree with that? You can disagree with me, but I mean, do you think that you've got like a core that kind of comes through and sneaks in? I know back in the day when I was writing for Random House, themes of independence and finding your own dream, controlling your life, those were themes that appealed to me as a writer that I wanted to explore. And I just wondered if you knew of any themes that you like to explore as a writer, or that you go, oh, look, I really care about this issue because it's here again.
I think some of my basics are overcoming, escaping abuse, overcoming scars, the emotional and physical scars that happen from abuse, that those in power have a responsibility, and that corruption will destroy a society.
Yes.
And also that we are the caretakers of the world. And so there's always seems to be a group of characters who are the caretakers of the world. In the Black Jewels, it's the blood. They have the strongest connection to the land. In Tir Alainn, it was the witches. In Ephemera, well, Ephemera is so broken, but it's the landscapers who hold the world and hold the world's heart to keep it steady. With the others, it's all of the Terra and Dixon who are the ones who protect the world. So yeah, I mean, we've got Meg, we've got Vicky, and all of a sudden there's very powerful beings who go, yeah, we kind of like her. We're going to keep her and we're going to protect her. So, yeah.
And you've done something else with your worlds, which I've always found very interesting, because you found different ways to go and explore those worlds and bring, more stories to the readers, as opposed to here's book 1, 2, and 3, and we're done now. But one of the things that you did with the other series, and this is book number 2 of sort of a sub-series of the others, it's still the same world, but a whole new set of people in a new place, but set in the same world with a lot of what we love and are familiar with. And then you added a little bit of, I don't know how you do it. It's the dark, cozy fantasy mystery. I don't know how you do it. How you go, genre makes no difference to me. I've got a great story and I'm putting it in there, and it's awesome. Crowbones is. So I find it really interesting the way your brain works to take your world and then go somewhere else with it. Does that take a long time for you? Is it bubbling in your brain as you're writing your standard book? Is an offshoot bubbling in your brain? Or does that come along after you finish the stories you're working on? How do you grow those worlds? Hard question, I know, but
because it was with the Lake Silence books, it was more, I started out with what would a Krogard cozy look like? Because Krogard
as you do,
cozy,
as you're just sitting around thinking, what would a Krogard fantasy cozy dark mystery look like? And
so I started with the template of the cozy mystery, but set in that world, and a lot of the cozies have first-person narrators. So I started with Vicky, who was this individual, and she had a voice, and Vicky and I just sort of swung into it, and suddenly there was more story, and all of a sudden there was Grimshaw, and there was Aggie. Well, there was Aggie with the eyeball, and from there it just was like watching something coming down on me and going, just write as fast as you can, because it was more, it was Grimshaw, so it's kind of police procedural mystery, figure it out. It's the coast, because you've got the amateur sleuths It's dark because you've got the characters who basically eat people who are bad, which gets a lot of cheering at times. And all of these things, and it's just more gleefully going, they could do this. And I'm writing away and going, yes, these people, this character, and finding out more. And slowly and because I don't know everything about them, I just know on an intuitive level, like the 5 that were introduced, they are terrifying, actually, if you think about what they do, and the fact that they just stand out and go, monkey man, and you
Oh
know
yeah, that was creepy. The whole monkey man thing was pretty creepy.
Yeah.
So
yeah. So I for the 2 in Lake Silence, it was just wanting to explore the mystery. What it'd be like to write a mystery in that world. When I wrote Wild Country, I wanted the template of the Western, because it was set out west. So you have the gunslingers, you have the sheriff, you have the younger deputy, you have all of the tropes of the Western, but the sheriff is a werewolf. Well, he's a wolf. He's not a werewolf because he's never really human. He just takes on a human shape when he feels like it. And you have all of these shifters, and you have the Sanguinati, and you have this town that is very strange, and you're asking, the characters are coming in, and you roll the dice, you take your chances. They aren't going to put a lot of people in jail. They're just going to eat them. But it's a chance for a new start. So I wanted to play with the Western, and I took it that way. And I wanted to play with mysteries. In the Black Jewels world, I wrote Tangled Webs because I wanted to play with a lock to a mystery with some of those characters. And I wanted to see what it was. So I put a Surreal and Rainier in basically a haunted house that was designed to kill them.
Yeah, it was the Black Jewels equivalent of a Halloween evening when we all troop out to go to the haunted house, and everything in the haunted house goes wrong. And so it was a great deal of fun, but it was also Black Jewels. I mean, it was so perfectly on point with who your characters were and who you chose, because I find that very interesting. You didn't just do another book with your main characters from your series. We got secondary characters who were suddenly thrust into the protagonist roles as they worked their way through this unexpected task that you set for them, is how to get out of this closed door mystery house that was trying to kill them. So I always find it very interesting how your mind works. Does your agent find that very interesting, or does she just go, thank you, we'll just, I mean, have you had any pushback? How do you deal with that as a writer? Do you have any wisdom to share about how to manage the relationship between agents and editors, or anything like that for the folks out there?
I've been really blessed because I have the fortune of having an agent who finds my brain really interesting in what it does, and my editor does too. So no one's ever said, well, maybe. It's more of an, so what are you thinking of now? I go, well, I'm over here and I'm doing this, and we're going to go wild country with a Western, and there's going to be wolves and vampires and a human deputy. And they go, okay. So,
Well, you deliver the goods in the book. I mean, the idea is so fun to talk about, but then you make believers of us and you deliver the goods. I think if folks knew what your reading list was and how you feed your muse, sometimes Anne will come back from the bookstore and she'll just send me a text of the books that she got at the bookstore. And it's always the most amazing collection of stuff. And I never quite knew how it fits until later. And then I go, oh, I get it now. Queen Elizabeth and the book Stiff by Mary Roach. Okay, I see where these ideas are coming from. But I never know when she just has this huge stack of the most interesting nonfiction books and sometimes fiction stuff that you're going, okay. Well, I know that you have a enabler friend who leads you to certain sections of the bookstore at Barnes and Noble. So I know that Jen is responsible for some of the eclectic reading. But when you go to the bookstore and you're a paper, you love to hold the book as an object and that kind of stuff. Do you know what you're going for? Do you know the subject you're going for, or are you just wandering? What's the deal?
it's both. A lot of times I will be interested in the subject. And I admit that women's rights have always been subject of interest. So there's a lot,
especially in the Tir Alainn books, I think that comes through. Yeah.
So it's everything, because I'm looking at, I've got, oh wow, yeah, I've got Mary Roach, and I've got a new book by Lucy Cook, which, being a PG-13, we can't really say the title, but it has a B, a T, a C, an H, and an I.
Okay.
And one of the chapters is 50 ways to eat your lover, and I thought, I'm sold. That's on my reading list.
With a nice
right next to a
Chianti.
book about dead bodies, Stiff, and how death is handled in America and in other cultures. And so you got dead body stuff right next to sensuality stuff, and it's not going to have anything to do with that. But I mean, it's just, you have a wide ranging palette in terms of what you read. It always fascinates me. So
yeah, and a lot of layman's psychology, which has always fascinated me, and books on nature. So some of the other things I have on my reading stack is about a man-eating tiger and about the kraken, the life of squids. And
as you do,
I read a book called Life, which was animals who break human laws, which I thought it was wonderful. Because she mentioned, this was also Mary Roach, and she mentioned how some of the bears that break into people's houses, some of them are messy and some of them are very careful, so that you don't really know that they've broken in until you start seeing the things missing. And one of the rangers pointed out that the bears will go into the freezer and eat all the Haagen-Dazs and leave the cheap ice cream.
really?
Higher fat, higher sugar.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah.
So yeah, and all of those things, it is. You've got a book about dead bodies. You've got a book about the female of the species in all its talking glory. You've got a book about packaging girlhood, which is about how we market to girls, and we market our girls. And then I also have the ghost times along Route 66, which is another.
The best times along Route 66. Okay, one of those places is going to end up in one of your stories. I know it. I know it. You're going to build a world around some place on Route 66.
There's a great clown themed motel that's still there.
Or something else. Yeah. And I don't know how these things come together, because all of a sudden it's a little bit like watching pinball, or one of those machines where you just the silver ball goes in and you watch it go and you hope it doesn't tilt. But you go ding 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 ding, and all of the ideas are there, and suddenly there's who knows.
So all of these things are just basically those soap bubbles you're talking about. You're just reading all of this, you're consuming all of this, and soap bubbles are being created that you were talking about that then start to collide and settle into an idea for you.
Yeah. And I would say for people just starting, well, for anybody, but if you're a beginning writer and you're wondering how to do this, keep a notebook, keep file folders, keep something where when those little things go ping, this is interesting, that you can just write a quick note or write down the page number and a book title so that you can go back to it and take a look at it when something else connects to it. Or something that is odd. I wrote a story, one of my early stories, and I was typing up a letter, I think, for my boss, and the words were supposed to be a hooting guffaw, and my fingers wrote Haddon Hugum, and I looked at the words Haddon Hugum and I said, I know who he is, and so I ended up writing a story called Haddon Hugum and the Dragon, because I had done typos for a hooting guffaw. And that part. So you don't know.
Yep.
Hope everything. And it's like panning for gold. You throw everything in, you shift it around, and you take out the nuggets that mean something to you. And then see what happens when you put them together. That's the fun of it. That's the journey of writing a story, is that there's all these possibilities. I don't know where they're all going to fit. I'm writing a story that draws from some of the things I learned from Mary Roach's Dead People. And some of the things she said you can't put back in because they belong to her. But they still make me laugh. They still, I think about them and go, I really can't tell anybody that, because I can't, some mentions the thing about the maggots and go, yeah, they not, some things you just don't want to tell people when they're
Well, go ahead, Jim.
Nope, go ahead, Deb.
You mentioned fun, and having fun writing, and you do, because you are also entertaining yourself. But what is one of the most fun career moments you've had? Was it the first contract? Was it the hitting the NYT? Was it the first time you realized that you were important enough for your publisher to pick you up and send you on a book tour and treat you like a queen? What are those high points that have been so fun to you as a writer that you've really been able to enjoy? Is there anything that stands out?
When I was waiting for the first novel, for someone to read that or the Blood Nurture, say, yes, we'll take it, I would go to a bookstore in front, and we would stand there at the B's and point out, and she would say, you're going to be there someday. You're going to be in that spot on shop. And then I would get the next rejection letter and go, oh. No, but then Daughter of the Blood was published, and there I was on that shelf where we said, and we just stood there and cried because it was just so much, so much hope and wanting and dreaming, and there it was. There it was. So that was big. The first time you get on the New York Times is big. Every time I walk into the bookstore when the book comes out, when there's a new book out, and I see it for the first time, that's always on. That's always the celebration. I get baffled by my brain says yes. My publisher says there's a good reason to send me out, and we do get good response from when we do the book tours. But for so many years, and I stopped saying it because I know that I don't understand it the way other people do. I would say, but this writer, they're a big name, and people around me would think, "Pam, you're a big name too now," and I don't get that. I just, in some ways, I that doesn't compute. It just goes. And
You're still you. You haven't totally accepted the Ann Bishop identity, huh?
No, and
May I suggest a tiara?
it's probably a good thing because when I say those things and I have friends that would just say, "That's okay. You don't have to understand it. You just don't write your stories. It's okay." And that's kind of where it feels like is that I write my stories, and that's what I do. And I don't understand a lot of the things that are where we are in the rungs of the ladder. I write stories, and I'm really happy that other people want to share them and enjoy them. And some of the stories they help people overcome their own scars, and I think that's. I write to entertain, but I also write to explore emotional truth, and that I think is one of the things that's always in my stories too, is that I explore emotional truth in a fictional place that is safe ground, and that to me is valuable because I couldn't write some of these subject matters that I write if I was putting it in a contemporary world. It would be too traumatic for me as a writer. But in a fantasy world where you have unicorns and dragons and magical and honorable men and strong women, you can explore those things and come on and have people overcome, or equally important, acknowledge and accept that they are going to live with these scars. And that they don't always succeed, but they get up again and try again.
Yep.
So yeah, I am better off doing what I do because a lot of the other stuff confuses me.
Well, and I love how you talk about not your books, my published books, not my novels, just your stories. You just write your stories and live in that place. And I think that's probably why they are so emotionally honest with a lot of the characters. You really dig in there in a way that sometimes the reader's not prepared for. And you remain honest with your characters and your world. Sometimes people die. Sometimes things don't turn out the way, Sometimes police chiefs are given a parakeet when they didn't know they were going to get one. You do whatever is right for the story, even though it might be hard for the reader to go through that. So, which I respect a lot.
Well, it's a lot harder for me too, because I'm taking the characters on a journey, and I make two promises. The first is to the characters that I will not judge them, and I will write their story as honestly as I can. And my second promise is to readers that I will write the story to the very best of my ability. But the first promise comes first, that the characters are allowed to be who and what they are. And that means that some of those characters have really been difficult. They've really been difficult. It's one of the reasons I can't go back to Tir Alainn, is because Adolfo, the head inquisitor, my brain says I wrote him, you wrote the words. But I had to live inside his skin, and he, more than any other character, Adolfo absorbed him right down to his and I can't go back to that world. But the House of Diane, my house was actually fragile because of the emotional toll that story told. So I can't go back there. I would love to. I would love to tell you that Earth Magic again, but I can't go back there. Yeah.
I don't think readers always understand the emotional toll books can take on an author. How you have to be in touch with things and feel things as you're writing them. And it's not all puppies and rainbows when you're writing a book, even though in mass market commercial fiction, we do get hope for change. We're comfortable that we're going to get a satisfying ending, but it's still sometimes hard to walk that journey and deliver to the reader that emotional character journey and process that we want and demand from the best writers, the writers we're willing to shell out big bucks for. So, like, buy everything they write. I mean, I found you, and then I bought everything that you had printed, and then lied, schemed, and cheated to get a book that was not yet printed so that I could read it. Because for me, you're one of those kind of writers. So.
And now that we've inspired everyone on how they can go and get an art copy.
Yeah, I know. Now you know how to do it. So
you just have to join and become the president of, RWA or SIFWA or your favorite organization. And then once you're there, you too can use the information to get a hold of who you need.
Yeah. Whatever works. Whatever works.
Go with those motivations.
Yeah.
Well, I'd love to keep going, but we've been going for a while.
Yeah.
But before we get out of here, let's let everybody know where to find you guys. And so Deb, how about you?
For me, always Bell Books, publisher. That's where I spend all my time. I'll be beginning to do a little traveling post Panini. And so I'll be in California in the fall doing one of the full day workshops. But I'm just now starting to book out schedule. But, Debra Dixon at bellbooks.com is the email to reach me. And then tonight I'll be doing a panel on law enforcement with some other folks who have great opinions and information on how writers can write law enforcement in a way that really works for their books. So.
And Anne, I want to thank you so much for coming to join us. And hopefully this is not the last time. But how does everybody make sure we stack up their to be read piles?
Well, you can find me at annbishop.com, and that's my website, and I try to keep it up to date to show everybody the latest books and the latest issues and the news of what's coming out. And Facebook, you can also find me at Dark Realms and Bishop's Courtyard, because they're the wolves tend to share the news. So we have big aroos, everybody aroos. And that's pretty much where you can find me.
And Deb,
Otherwise, I'm sitting there with my laptop writing stories.
you got to keep cranking out more stories.
Mhm.
Got to get them out of your head. And
Yeah.
Deb, if you would be so kind to hold up that copy of the newest release one more
I
time.
can do that.
Available everywhere from all your favorite bookstores
Yep.
now.
Yep. The best creepy, dark fantasy, cozy mystery, urban fantasy set in the world of the others. It's awesome. I make no money. I'm not her publisher. I just highly recommend her work.
And I've had the pleasure of hanging out with these ladies today, and I am Jim Nettles. You can find me at jamesbnettles.com, authoressentials.net, speculativefictionacademy.com, and of course, here at ConTinual. And we will see everybody again soon. And hopefully we'll be dragging Anne back on to do more with us.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Thanks, everyone, and we'll be back soon.
Bye, guys.